So it's spring here in Burgundy, and I thought it might be an interesting time to go into the vineyards and talk about some of the things that you can see and help make sense of what's going on. Now, you can see here that we're looking at a vineyard that's recently been cultivated, and it's worth sort of saying a few words about why people do that. Now, the real constraints in Burgundy are soils that are relatively thin and not particularly vigorous for plants, and then also rather high densities of plantation. So a vineyard like this is what, 10, 12,000 vines per hectare. It's really very high density of plantation. In fact, before phylloxera, the densities were even higher, so high that the vineyards had to be cultivated by hand manually. So this sort of system of neat rows is relatively recent, really only dates back to the late 19th century. But with this sort of density of plantation and rather impoverished soils, many people certainly feel, and throughout history have felt that you need to cultivate to reduce competition, to mineralize nutrients, to allow the vines to grow, without too much sort of stress for nutrients or whatever. And now some people are trying to experiment with things like with so-called no-till, where you leave all the cover crops, natural cover crops, and then maybe roll them or do things to try to sort of suppress them. But it is challenging in Burgundy to do that. And you can see here that this vineyard has been cultivated recently with discs on either side of the rows, and then the cover crop in between the rows has also been broken down. And, that's a very classic way of doing things. Introduces a lot of organic matter into the soil. You see these soils are extremely healthy, beautiful, structured, clusters of structure in the soil. And no, it's looking good. You can also see that no frost damage here, and generally this year so far Burgundy's been spared by frost. We're looking at a bit of a hydric deficit, so only 40%, about 40% less than historic average in terms of rainfall this year. So dry, but not super dry, but it's something to look out for. And that's something you can manage by maybe leaving cover crops in the center of the rows and rolling them or things like that. But it's tricky, just on a mechanical level, getting tractors in and doing very precise things between the rows with planting densities like this is much harder than at lower density situations. So this puzzle here shows another kind of approach to sort of soil management, which is a combination of mechanical cultivation and herbicides. You can see this sort of band of dead grass around the vineyard, but you can also see the fact that the vineyard has been mechanically cultivated. But you see, the advantage, well, it's not an advantage, but if in terms of convenience, you see, a plant like this is dead, so any weeds you miss between the rows or whatever, the herbicides take care of. And so you might do something like this, maybe 3 glyphosate applications per year, and then mechanical cultivation afterwards. It kind of looks better than the sort of chemical wasteland that you get with glyphosate without cultivation. But in reality, it's probably even worse for soil structure, because not only are you killing all of the life and you're not introducing organic matter, but you're also sort of oxygenating the soils and breaking up soil structure. So in a situation like this, you would often get a lot of erosion when there's rain. And so this is, the even less sort of attractive version, which is just, blanket application of herbicide. It doesn't look like any has been applied yet in the last couple of months, but you see the sort of spray band. But there are some sort of wild geraniums that have been coming up. But you can tell from the moss, and the remains of pieces of pruning or whatever that soils are not cultivated ever, and that instead you're just applying herbicides to control the sort of natural cover crop that would otherwise come into the vineyards. But as I said, it looks like it hasn't been sprayed yet. Now, the disadvantage of working like this, it's fair to say that there were some advantages in the 70s. This was sold to people who were selling a product that wasn't particularly well valorized and didn't make them very much money, and it was and the physical material for cultivating vineyards mechanically was not on the level that it is today. And this was a sort of way to provide them with greater prosperity, the possibility of taking the occasional vacation, whatever, made life easier. And it was very attractive. And I think anyone who's manually cultivated a vineyard understands such things a little bit better. But it has big disadvantages, I think, for environmental reasons and for wine quality as well. I mean, as soils like this get a lot hotter. They're deficient in organic matter, but they also get a lot hotter in the sun, warm up faster than soils where there's some sort of natural cover crop. And they dry out faster. They get waterlogged quicker, and then the water just runs off. And you often, something like this, you get these sort of furrows that established between the rows because of erosion over the years, when it's been going on like that since the 70s. And it's generally, I think, these days when the bottle price of Burgundy, average bottle price of Burgundy, this is a rather good Premier Cru vineyard here, one of the best in the Côte de Beaune, there's no real justification for it, I think. But, it remains a technique that people are attached to, and vines like these almost certainly have very superficial rooting systems because they've been used to not being cultivated, probably getting plenty of fertilizer through the surface as well. Everything's very superficial, so if you start to mechanically cultivate a vineyard like this, the vines are really going to suffer. You'll lose a lot. It's a difficult cycle to break, but thankfully more and more people are breaking it.